first off, I want to thank you for just taking the time to, have this conversation. I find that like there's so much subjectivity in this, and I think we're trying to get better with all of this. For those that are out there, everybody has their own perspective on policing and what it looks like in their own background and stories with the cops, and I have my own as well. But I think there's a level of communication that hasn't been done yet. At least I would like there to have been. I haven't seen it yet, but that hasn't been done yet to kind of get a little bit more of a cop's perspective, but also still addressing some of the things that we know is important to us. And then when I say us, just so you know, Clyde, one thing about me is I try to be down the middle, try to be straightforward, try to be as fair as possible. The one thing I cannot erase is I cannot erase that I'm a Black man from New York and then moved to the South. And so my experiences are there. And you understand where I'm coming from. So first off, I wanted you to take a couple minutes out. Let's jump right on in. Just go ahead and give us a little bit of an intro of yourself, and then we jump in.
All right. So first of all, thank you for having me and indulging in this conversation that I feel as though is very important and needed. I think the importance of this conversation goes back to the fact that we as a community need to heal. There are a lot of things going on in the world of police and community relations that we're now starting to see, and it's live on TV, and it's a lot of trauma, and that people are starting to see these incidents that are caught on either cell phone cameras or either body worn cameras, and so we now have, and before us, a large number of incidents that are keeping our members of our community, your community and mine, that are keeping them traumatized based on some of the images that they're seeing. So what has to happen is that we need to start the healing process, and a part of that healing process is for us to have conversations like this. And we have the unique opportunity with dealing with this pandemic to sit where you are in the South, and here I am in Baltimore, for us to go back and forth and have an electronic conversation here on Zoom and Facebook and other social media platforms, to where we can have this open dialogue, and you can actually see what I'm saying and basically communicate and look at me and see my facial expressions and my body language, and I get to do the same with you. And that is a part of us getting started to have these courageous conversations. So a little bit about me. I'm a 20-year law enforcement guy. I started out in 2000, and I began my career as a transportation officer for the state of Maryland, where I transported people that were in custody to court hearings and things like that. I then transferred over to the Baltimore City Sheriff's Office, where I began my career as a deputy sheriff. I stayed there about 18 months, and then I left there. And in 2003, March of 2003, I came to the Baltimore City School Police, where I currently work. I started out my career at school police as a patrolman, and then that particular assignment was at a local middle school, because in Baltimore we're unique. Some cities have them. Most big cities do have their own school police department, and that's where we're unique. In Baltimore, we have a police department specifically for the schools, and it's separate in and of itself from the local police department. So in most jurisdictions, they call them resource officers. And for us, we're just school police officers. So
can I ask you a question real quick about that?
Sure.
Do y'all do you have separate precincts for that? Or is it just kind of one and then you just everybody just comes out of there?
We actually have our own headquarters, our own command staff, our own chief of police, our own patrol cars, our own, we do share a radio system where we can communicate with the local police department. So all of the police departments in Baltimore City, we all are able to communicate via radio, whether it's the sheriff's office, the city police department, us, and some of the other police departments locally, like some of the universities. like Coppin State and Morgan State. They have their own police departments, but we can speak to them on the radio as well. University of Maryland, and I can't think of the other ones right now, but it is a large group of police officers that can all speak on the same radio system. But that is a byproduct of the poor communications that we had at the time of the events of September 11th. So as a fallout, we improved our communications, and now we can all communicate and speak to each other. So as a member of the Baltimore City School Police, I started out at the local middle school, and then there was an opportunity where I was blessed with the opportunity. I asked for it as an assignment. The high school that I attended, there was a vacancy that came up to go back to the high school that I attended as a student as the school police officer, and that opportunity came in 2004. When I got there in 2004, the principal, that was my high school principal, was still the principal there, and he welcomed me with open arms. He remembered me. I was a two-sport athlete when I attended school there, and also participated in other activities such as band and Big Brothers and things like that. But he remembered me as a student, and he welcomed me in, and that began the relationship with being back at my alma mater and building, relationships within the same community that I grew up in as a child. So I was literally, steps away from my childhood home. And so it was kind of funny when you had me go on calls for service in the neighborhood or in the community or just away from the school or at the local convenience store and things like that. You would have people still refer to me by my nickname because, they didn't know who Officer Boatwright was. They just, nickname because they knew me. Hey, no, that's just Chip. That's Kim's son. Hey, right. Chip, we got these students over there hanging out in the alley. They're not going to school, and they will call me on my cell phone. So when you do that, sorry to cut you off, but I do want to kind of cut in with that because, when you go from being a citizen to an authority figure, right? What was that like, right? Especially as a Black man, right? Because, I'll be straight up with you, like sometimes you're like, yo, dag, yo, dude, like it depends on what side of the coin you're on, like, dag, yo, like, all right, I guess dude's a cop now, so whatever. Or you got some people's like, yo, like it's dope. He's trying to serve his community. And, and so you got that kind of wrestle, you know what I mean? So what was that like? And how did you, because now you've been in it for almost 20 years, but how did you eventually break out of that connection? Not saying break out of the connection with the neighborhood. I'm hoping you're still totally ingrained in your community. But my point is that how did you disconnect from that how was it? How was it and how you disconnected from that? So there was no need to necessarily disconnect. The need for me was to understand that I'm there to do a job and provide a service. And that service was to serve and protect my community. For far too long, we all looked at police officers that were when I grew up, the police officers that policed our community and in my area of Baltimore City, those were officers that looked like me. So we got to see people that we knew. And we got to know their names, and they came and sat on the porch and sat with your grandmother and drank iced tea in the summertime and came and got a cup of coffee in the wintertime, because that was the type of policing that was expected back then. It was pretty much you had to walk the beat and get to know the people in the community and get to know everyone's name. And so that kind of spilled over into when I became a police officer in law enforcement. I had to, remember how I came up and how I engaged with the police officers in our community and how we had that dialogue. And, again, you shouldn't have a mindset that you're there to police the community. You're there as a resource and as a public servant. Do you think everybody else shares that same perspective? Well, I think the vast majority of the people that I've dealt with either share the same sentiment or echo the same sentiment, or if people that don't feel that way, they usually phase themselves out. They usually realize that they can't adapt to urban policing. They realize that they can't deal with the climate in the community because they cannot relate. And so they go to other areas that are able to address their needs or their wants or their desires. There's no shortage of crime. And I want to make this clear. Like in the city of Baltimore, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, we had high levels of crime. it was during the middle of the crack epidemic, and so crack cocaine became persistent in our community. We had high levels of overdose, and we had high levels of people selling drugs. So there was no shortage of crime. So so I don't want to paint this picture that it was all roses when I grew up, and that we had this great working relationship with the police, because as a kid we didn't always have that. However, some of the old guys would tell us, if you don't like the things in your community, be a part of the change that you want to see. So why don't you become a police officer and then go in to your community and come back and be the change that you want to see, as opposed to sitting there and complaining.
So real quick, I want to touch on something that I noticed that you said. I thought it was, I think that perspective you gave was great, especially with just hoping that people do want to do something in their community when they become a cop, right? Like actually want to see a change and actually be the change. But you also said, and I don't know if you meant it this way, but it was just the way you said the way it was expected back then. Maybe I'm just kind of catching on the words or something like that, but back then versus now, or what do you think? Like, what has the expectations of the community changed for what they expect when they interact with the cops now versus, you know what I'm saying?
So no, so the when I made that comment about back then, the expectation was, back then was, you build relationships with the community first. We're now in American policing, where we are now, it's you're coming out of the station house, you're coming out to 14 calls pending, you're coming out running from call to call to call to call, and you don't have that opportunity to walk foot. You don't have that opportunity to engage the community.
And that's why I wanted to talk about that, because I felt like, again, I don't think you intended this way, but it's a good segue into this one area or one topic about just the overall police duties, right? So if you, and again, I know you're coming from the perspective of being in Baltimore and being in Maryland, so it has a different feel. So you can't speak for all 50 states and all the cities and so on and so forth. But the fact that, at one point in our time, we could do X, Y, Z that built relationship with the community. And now we have all this stuff going on that's almost in some cases distracting. And I'm using what you're sharing with me, right? Is distracting from being able to actually build relationship with the community. But, is policing structured properly? What is the scope of a cop, right? I mean, because to me, I'm kind of like, dag, like two issues. One, the scope is large. The other is now you got cops that really don't know the people that they're policing. There's no, the relationship is reduced.
I don't want to, misconstrue the facts here. So there are, in some communities, great relationships.
Of course.
With officers. However, you have the demand on police officers that is different in some communities. Meaning,
and that's what. Just I want to make sure I wasn't trying to imply that cops don't have relationships with their community, but more of the fact that the scope is expanded and it makes it difficult to build the relationships in certain communities like the way it used to be. And it's not uncommon. I've read articles that says something similar to what you just shared. Does that? I hope that makes
No, it actually clears it up, because what happens is you have the expectation of leaders, of political figures and police chiefs and sheriffs that they have an expectation that you're going to do certain things to bring down crime. You're going to do this. And then they also have this expectation that we'll put 5 or 10 people together and call them community service officers or community relations officers. And this is at a global perspective, because when the concept of community policing came about, that's what they felt. We'll create a special unit that just build relationships with the community, and then we have all of the other guys that are just focusing on some of the other things. And I think that concept in policing, there is a model that can work. However, it shouldn't be solely focused on your community service officer who's dedicated to the community relations unit, who's dedicated to the various community groups. Well, you have one neighborhood, that's what I meant. That's the exact term, the neighborhood associations.
Okay.
So you have these various neighborhood associations that have one person that's dedicated as their point person. And they don't necessarily get a chance to meet the post guy, the guy who is in that beat every day, who's on that street every day, who is the person that's responding for the calls for service. And so that's what I was used to growing up, where the guy who was responsible for writing a police report on my street, if we had something happen, was the guy that we knew, as opposed to having one particular point person that we would have to go through a neighborhood association president just to get a comment from. So that's the difference in policing in the 1980s to now, to the 2020 policing. You have community associations that only deal with one particular person, as opposed to the guy that's on the beat.
Got you. I appreciate you diving into that a bit more. I'm not sure if we fully got into the scope piece yet, but I think we're getting there. And tell me if I'm off here, right? I think we're getting there. Do you find that cops are doing too much?
So when I poll my counterparts and other officers, and that can be a segue into, I know we're going to at least at some point touch deeply into the defunding police. When I talk to my coworkers and friends and colleagues, and I talk to officers all over the country, and when I speak to them, there are some things that can be released from the responsibility of a police officer. There are some things that officers would like to have off their plate. But what does that look like? And I'll give you an example. If you allow your cousin or relative to sleep on your couch and you have a disagreement, and you want that cousin to be removed from your house, why are we getting the police involved and saying, I want him out of my house, I'm calling 911 because you won't leave? That is a civil dispute between family members. Now, if it becomes violent, then it becomes a police issue, but it shouldn't become violent. There's a method that you should go through. I know in Baltimore City, we have a thing where if you want to evict someone or have someone move from your house, you have to go through an eviction process. But to have us come there and physically remove someone, now you have a police contact that shouldn't even have happened, whereas, that's something that was internal that should have been dealt with internally with your family member.
So in some cases, and that's a good example. Are you saying that we, and when I say we, I'm talking about citizens, have increased our request, like our expectations of you by doing that, by just saying, I'm going to call the cops. Yeah, like I'm going to call a higher authority to get you out of here.
Yeah, so I would say there is an increased dependency on policing to solve all of communities' ills. And I agree with some of the naysayers who are against policing, that we are not the problem solvers of everyone. I agree with, I think that's, we fundamentally agree with that across the board. But how do we achieve that middle ground? Because that's what we need to be. We need to be in that middle ground, because I am not for the defunding of police departments in order to shift all of those resources towards mental health and other avenues. I don't support that.
So let's jump into defunding the police, because I can even tell you're a little more passionate when you started talking about it. I don't know if it's because, I don't know what, it's the 20 years in you, I don't know if it's the fraternal or police in you, or it's just Clyde Boatwright being Clyde Boatwright. I don't know which one it is, probably all three. I didn't really have a good smooth way to ask this question about it, but I'm just gonna give commentary on it, and then we just kind of go from there. I mean, the defunding the police thing has been a very polarizing subject, period, no matter where you are in the US, I think even outside the US, for like the last 3 to 4 weeks. And where you have different cities that are turning around and basically saying, hey, look, we're gonna go ahead and put in some bills, legislation, rules, et cetera, so on and so forth, to go ahead and defund the police. And I think without having proper definition of what defunding the police is, a lot of people kind of took and ran with it, right? They're like, I hate the cops. They went NWA with it, right? F the police, and let's go ahead and start taking money from them. When really a lot of it is about shifting funds, right? It's about basically taking funds to help change either the way we deal with people, like you said earlier, you just made a comment about mental health, right? How we deal with the community, the citizens in the community, or how we properly train or adjust the training of police officers, right? So basically shifting that and saying our cops need to be trained more in the mental health area. And I'm not speaking like a defunding the police expert, because I'm not. I just think it's important that we touch on that, because you don't like it. Like you, based on what you just said, oh, you don't appear to like, I don't want to put anything in your mouth. I'm not trying to Don Lemon you or anything like that, but like, what is your take on defunding the police? You already kind of said, but I want to give you a moment to go in.
So I think it's important that we understand what the community wants when it comes to defunding police. In some circles, defunding the police means to abolish the police.
Right.
I've heard some community activists state that they want to live in a world where there's no police. I think that's a little extreme.
That's very extreme, actually. I will agree with you there. That's very extreme.
In 2020 America, that's extreme.
Yeah.
Then there's the other group of people who want to shift the responsibilities of policing to mental health, to social workers.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that, they want to reallocate the funding that comes to police departments to go along with funding the social workers, the mental health professionals, and others, and the like. And the third group of people that in that group are calling for defunding police are those that want to be able to influence policy. They want to be able to shift priorities of policing, and they want to be able to have more community control. And so how to strike a balance between the three? I think we all know the abolishing the police is too far an extreme. The reality
you're not going to have an argument for me. I'm not speaking for everybody, but you're speaking for myself. You're not going to have an argument for me on like abolishing the police. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense to me. But go ahead.
But you have those that want to reallocate the funds. And so
that's different than abolishing the police, though.
It's totally different.
Okay.
But when you talking about defunding a system and moving the revenue from the police department, there's a reason why the cost associated with running police departments exist, such as training, such as equipment, such as tools, such as uniforms, such as collective bargaining agreements. And see, when you get down deeper into the woods with that, a lot of people don't like organized unions. A lot of people don't like collective bargaining agreements. A lot of people don't think that police departments should be involved in or have a union. And that's for various reasons, because there's 16 states throughout the United States that have something that's called the Police Officers Bill of Rights, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. That was a bill that started in legislation in 1974 here in the state of Maryland, because you had rogue police chiefs that pretty much, as the history tells me, that we had black cops that white police chiefs wanted to get rid of in the 1970s. I mean, that's right. They created a plan that was put in place to benefit, making sure officers had due process rights. And so that gets into the shifting of responsibilities and shifting of the policies, that part of the equation of the pie. So there's three parts of the pie. We talked about abolishing, reallocating funds, and shifting the priorities. So when you get back into the reallocation of funds, and let's say we're going to talk about the mental health aspect of it. I've asked this question and I can't get a straight answer. Where is the database of mental health professionals that are ready to respond to a situation where a person is in a non-controlled environment who is having a behavioral crisis? Now, again, you'll have a few people that say, I want to go out to the middle of, let's say, Times Square, where you're from, somewhere that you're familiar with being a New Yorker. If you have a person that's having a behavioral crisis in the middle of Times Square, are we going to send our mental health professionals and social workers to respond to that?
Can I challenge you there?
Let's talk about it.
All right. So, first off, you said a good amount of things there. I appreciate that. It was dope, very detailed, and you're sharing your perspective, which is what we want. When I say we, not just me, because you're conversing with me, but whoever's viewing. I don't even know how many viewers are on right now, and we'll go listen to this. Mental health. So you're like, well, where's the database? I think that question is a legit question, right? Where's the database? But really, it's about how do we get to a point where we can build something like that, right? Because you have, like, when it comes to mental health, I'm not a mental health expert, but I have a huge value for mental health, and I'm sure you do as well. You have the police who are definitely responders, right, to incidents that are occurring out in the community, and your knowledge of mental health, which is going to be important. And then the part you just brought up on, like, the mental health professionals that are just ready and willing and able to show up to help de-escalate an issue, right? Why can't they both actually exist? So you're saying, where's the database? But I don't know if that's a fair question. This is what I'm challenging a little bit. A fair question. We know it probably doesn't exist, but it needs to be created. And in order to possibly do that, and again, I'm not speaking like for any city or whatever, in order to do that, maybe some fund shifting needs to occur to make that happen, to invest in that. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? But is that a fair question? Say, where's the database? That's why I'm pushing back to be like, hey, you know.
The question is fair, because if they exist, they're being paid by someone. And if they exist, why do you need the funds from police departments to be shifted to that and make that a priority?
But so, what if they don't exist? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, if they do.
They exist, and let me tell you how they exist.
Okay.
So let's use Baltimore City for an example.
Yeah.
We have major hospitals that employ these professionals, and they're excellent. They're excellent at what they do because they do it in a controlled environment within the grounds of their hospital. In fact, prior to becoming a police officer, I worked at a local hospital as a security officer, and we had a controlled environment. Mm-hmm. And so when you have these professionals that are not in their element, they're outside on the street, that becomes a situation where I think that if we both respond, if you send a mental health professional along with policing, along with police officers, then you could probably not have the police officer as the person that is out in front. So there is a model that exists that should be evaluated, but why shift all of the resources? You got police departments throughout the country that are shifting police budgets by 50%, 20%, and things like that. And now crime is skyrocketing in their communities because they're defunding and trying to shift towards this model that doesn't exist, that they want to create and use as a template. When if we're the best option right now, until we have something better, then why shift it? Why take the money and reallocate it?
So is your argument around defunding the police more around removing funds than it is adding funds for those services?
I think that you should add funds for those services. I think that when you look at budgets, why only defund the police? Look at Parks and Recs. Look at the transportation division. Look at everyone's budget and see where a city can be beneficial in shifting, reallocating resources in order to make mental health more of a priority if that's the issue right now. But I look at our major American cities, and mental health is not our major problem. Chicago, Baltimore City, New York City, Los Angeles, our major problem is crime and homicide. That's our major problem. People dying and being shot in the street. That's our major problem. So let's focus on what.
Can I cut in there? Can I cut in there?
Let's cut in.
Well, finish your statement real quick. Hold on. Let's focus on.
But I want people to prioritize. People that are in leadership positions. Let's prioritize on what's real. I mean, there's a perception that we need more mental health. There's a perception that we need more social workers. And look, again, policing. We're not going to solve all of the community's ills because if have this discussion about the deeper systemic issues, we can talk about that, but that's not the fault of the police.
Right. So real quick, what you just said, and now before we go into homicide and crime rates and everything, because that's a whole nother ball of wax. But I do want to touch on the way you said that's our problem, and I'm going to speak from my perspective only. That like our main problem is that I feel you, but I would almost say not a police or 911 focused version of mental health, but I will say the crime, the murders that have happened, etc., is still part of mental health issues. For someone to get up and kill someone, there's obviously something off up here. Am I making an incorrect statement?
I think that people have used crimes like violent crime, like shootings and stabbings, as a crime of opportunity because there's no sufficient penalty for that. If you bring people with swift justice, if they get justice, if you bring them, look, Right now in our criminal justice system, the police does an investigation, you make an arrest, they take a person before a judge or magistrate, they sit for a year, they go to trial, on a technicality they get off, they're back on the street, they murder someone else, and then it's like, why wasn't this person already in jail? It's a technicality, something with I wasn't dotted or a T wasn't crossed. And then, look, again, I agree with our criminal justice system. It's the best in the world. However, you bring someone before a judge or magistrate, you bring them before a jury of their peers, and if the case cannot be proven, then yeah, they should be able to be back on the street. But when they murder someone else again,
yeah,
you know, that's what we see in our cities. We're starting to see repeat violent offenders back on the street harming someone else.
Would you say there's no consequence? And I would almost say, like, if we look at, I'm going to make a little poke here, but like if we look at, you know, you said that we have the best criminal justice system in the world, and I'm definitely not going to argue that because I'm not on your side of the fence, and I think that that is your perspective that you have. But just because it's the best doesn't mean that it's good or perfect or flawless.
Right.
Okay, cool. That's fair. That's fair. And then the other aspect of that is that when we're talking about repeat offenders and the amount of justice, this is where I'm going to do my little poke, but we'll jump into this subject a little bit more later. And the justice that's deserved of the people who are committing the crimes, some would actually say, inclusive of myself, it's actually the same thing that happens with cops not getting the justice that they should, based off of the actions that they've taken against people who they're supposed to protect. You feel what I'm saying? And so when we have certain aspects in this subject,
I don't necessarily agree with you, but I understand what you're saying.
The whole point of civil conversations isn't to agree. The whole point isn't to agree. The whole point of civil conversations is to provide perspectives so that way we can understand each other and know where we're coming from, so we can inform the other person or the other parties involved as to why we're saying the things we're saying, and the other person can go ahead and maybe disagree, may present a valid argument or something, but just a different view that I may not have had. So I'm just presenting that to you a little bit for myself, but even on behalf of those who I know are viewing, some that are viewing, it's like, man, like cops get away with a lot of stuff. But again, let's table that, because I want to continue real quick to go back on this defunding piece, because it's funny because this all could trail into different aspects.
Right.
The defunding aspect is important, I think, and I'm not saying, I'm not in your shoes. I don't. First off, you know, you're the vice president of Fraternal Order of Police. You have, for the state of Maryland, president of the Fraternal Order of Police for Baltimore Public Schools. You have way more experience from your perspective than I do. So I'm not going to argue that. I will say that some of the things that are being brought up or have been brought up when it comes to defunding the police, what we're trying to do, we as in, like, I guess the collective we, it's not really me, trying to do in these different cities is to help change the way policing occurs, right? So you agree that if it's not defunding, that adding funds or something to help these other areas that we're concerned about, people are concerned about, is okay. That's your statement, right? Like, I'm not saying you're saying that you're right. I'm just saying that's your statement, right? Why pull funds away?
Yeah, I think that we should look at ways that we could prioritize what's important for your various communities and not just be on the social bandwagon that's sweeping across the country. Just because something is happening in Chicago or because it's happening in Atlanta, Georgia, does not necessarily mean it's happening here. Like, let's focus on what's best for our community. Because what happens is you'll have local jurisdictions, like you'll have a city that'll jump on the bandwagon, but the county that surrounds the city don't agree. And the state that surrounds the county does not agree.
And and I think that's a fair statement, because like when you think about it, like I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? And where I specifically live in Charlotte, and I'm sorry, I'm just fixing something here on my iPad, which this isn't perfect production, so people watching, y'all know I'm doing this. Where I live specifically in Charlotte area is outside of Charlotte and within a mile of the border of Charlotte, right? So if they make a decision on policing a mile from me, it's still going to impact me. I don't care what no one tells me. It's going to impact me, right? So I get what you're saying. I think I'm not trying to say that you're saying two different things, but it almost sounds like you're saying, hey, look, if you're going to do defunding, please evaluate this at the city, county, state, city, county level, not make it I guess a wash effect of funding across the board.
Right.
So are you, I'm not trying to dispute what you're saying. Are you saying defunding the police is a bad thing, or are you saying defunding police needs to be looked at differently? Because those are two different things. At first, it felt like you was against it altogether, but now you're like, hey, let's evaluate it. You feel me?
I think from the perspective of being a union guy.
Yeah.
As a union guy, we don't have control over the city budget. Now, we would like to have control over a city budget. In fact, we would like to have control over the police chief's budget. But I don't know a police chief that's going to give me, as a union president, the ability to make changes in his budget, or his or her budget. That's just not going to happen.
Okay.
We have to work within the construct and the confines of what we're given. And what we're seeing across the nation is a shortage of police. Why? Because we haven't defended the police, not defunded. We haven't defended the police enough to say, you know what? There are a few incidents. There's 1.5 million police contacts per year, but we can only always point to the 5 that end badly out of 1.5 police contacts. So nationwide. So let's look at how can we raise the numbers and get young people interested in this career field. That goes into another piece that I was going to go into, but I'm not going to shift your conversation. This is your conversation.
It's actually our conversation. So you good. You good.
The recruitment and retention of police officers. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about how, I'll use my colleagues in Baltimore City for an example, Baltimore Police. In 2012, they did a study, and that study, they released something that's called the Blueprint for Policing. For policing. In 2012, they did. They talked about raising the minimum standards of policing. They talked about requiring people to have a certain level of college education, because studies have shown that when a police officer or a person of authority is educated more, they're less likely to use force. That's studies. You know, there's studies about that on use of force. So if you give them other tools and other options, then you can start to look at more of a de-escalation. You can start to see other situations that come about other than the result of deadly force.
So you're concerned about defunding the police, trying to stay within that construct right now, is there's already issues within the police department that's occurred, like you just said, retention, right? Or education and training, et cetera, right? And you're like, dad, y'all about to take some money from us, and I'm trying to get help. Like I'm trying to make the police department better, and you're trying to take money. Is that your perspective?
That is definitely the perspective.
Okay, yeah. Cool. And the thing about it is, like, I want you to know, like, part of course, this conversation is to get your perspective. Like I will not sit here and act like your perspective is not important. It's hard when you have someone like myself, somebody who's like a viewer here, on either side, right? Either there may be cops watching this right now. There may be white people watching it, Indian, Spanish, black people from the hood, not even from the hood. So many different perspectives of what we have of the cops. So right now, the polarizing subject is, I'm talking to the devil. You and I both know you're not. But you get what I'm trying to say, right? You put on that badge, it's the rap. You know what I'm saying? And I have friends who are police officers, and I don't view them as bad people. I'll tell everybody that I don't view them as bad people. I will not say like XYZ is a bad person just because they're a cop. But when you have the badge, and when you have the badge on, you have the past life experiences, what's going on. We have the media, which is why I'm doing civil conversations, because I feel like the media is shaping one thing versus another, right? Who's going to say, you know, cops are one. That's how defunding the police is blowing up, right? It's all over the place. We're going to have a perception of you. But I think the number one perception of you, not you as in Clyde, but the number one perception of you that's important still, I don't want to say number one, but one of the top perceptions are the people who've had their own experiences with police officers, right? I mean, that's like, so when
that's usually where that I guess that mindset of a person, that's where those feelings come, and that's because there's a perception. And I think that's important for you to bring up. That is a very important thing, because sometimes we can't interpret what we don't understand. Even though it looks bad, it may not necessarily be bad. And when you get into a situation where, as a police officer, you have a lot of responsibility. And with that responsibility, in one moment, you have the ability and the authority to take someone's freedom, but you also have the authority in a split second to take someone's life. And that's a lot of responsibility for a police officer, and they shouldn't be lost on that. However, in that same context, with all of that responsibility, you also have to bring people to justice at times, sometimes. And when you make that decision that you're going to put your hands on someone and they do not want to go to jail, and that becomes a fight, there's no rules in fighting. But however, we want police officers to have rules when they're fighting, because, and the first thing I was taught when I was in policing, first thing I was taught was, every situation that you respond to, there's a gun involved, and that's your gun. So don't be in a position that you will be in a position where you can be disarmed and that gun will be used on you.
So can I ask you to clarify something? Because I don't know if you noticed my brow kind of, like I looked at my video, I was kind of like, there's no rules in fighting, but yet people want police to have rules. Is that what you just said? Did I hear that correctly?
As a child, you tell someone, don't let anyone hit you. You can defend yourself. Do what you have to do to defend yourself.
Right.
But then when you have a police officer actively engaged in a fight for his life, everybody want police to, hey, why didn't you pepper spray him? Why didn't you yell to him?
I got you. Okay,
why didn't you do this as opposed to that? Why didn't you do this as opposed to that?
Okay.
So there's an expectation that a police officer is going to follow certain rules. You're going to go through all of these steps before you take the appropriate action, which in some cases doesn't call for you to go through any of those steps at all.
So I want to be sensitive to that, being a cop, you being a cop, being a police officer. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, so I feel you. You are in a position where you are not sure how serious this threat is, especially in a resisting arrest standpoint. And I guess we might as well just kind of jump into that from the defunding piece a little bit. And I would like to be able to now lean towards Floyd and Rashard Brooks. We going there, all right? We just gonna have to. The part that I'm struggling with, and this is the nuance, this is what I'm trying to help me understand this, and maybe help you, maybe this will help you understand this, is like, I feel you, 100%, I get it. Yo, I don't think that all this stuff, people coming to me saying, why don't you shoot him in the leg? Why don't you shoot him in the arm? Why don't you shoot him in the, I don't shoot, basically non-fatal, okay? Non-fatal. Are those requests unfair of people who are trained to police? Because you used an analogy about in a fight. For example, if I'm a trained black belt in jujitsu or name a martial art, and I'm out here and I run into a dude at Chick-fil-A and he tripping, I'm trying to get the Lord's chicken and he's trying to start a fight. But I know what to do. Now, I've heard from several people who are pretty high, like pretty, skilled in these martial arts, that there's a way to do some things to eventually, to not cause permanent, when I say permanent, basically death, right? I think we expect that from cops because you went through training. So like there's a higher level, like it's not an equal fight. Like straight up, like if I don't know your size or whatever. I'm 5'11", 6 foot tall, 220 pounds. And I don't even know, let's say you're the same size. I don't have a weapon. You do. If we got into a fight, which is not a smart thing to do because you are an authority figure, but my point is, let's say you're not a cop. We got in a fight, there's no rules, but you're a cop. And you're trained. And you have the tools to do more harm to me than I do. Let's say I'm talking about disarmed. I'm not talking about an armed person, by the way. I'm not.
Sure.
Why wouldn't we have the expectation of you to be able to do something non-fatal? You see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to sit here and say, you can't kill us. I'm just saying, what's wrong with having that expectation? You feel what I'm saying?
So you raise a great point.
Sorry if I ramble. It was just hard for me because I heard you and I was kind of like,
No, this is healthy. And I think it's important to understand. You know what you're capable of. I don't know what you're capable of. Size does not matter.
Right.
I remember last week my granddaughter, who's 20 months old, when I had her in my arms and we were eating fruit and things like that, and I wanted to put her down, she clinged on to me and would not get down on the floor and start walking because that's not what she wanted to do at that time. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying that to say this: when you are in a situation where you're trying to make an arrest and the person refuses to go peacefully and they decide to fight, you don't know what that person's capable of. And just because you don't know what they're capable of does not give you the right to go and use deadly force. It does not. So there are mediums in there. Your presence, the fact that you gave them verbal commands,
right.
The fact that you tried to use your hands, the fact that you tried to use your pepper spray or your baton or your taser or all of those different other less than lethal things. So I think that what we have to look at when you have a use of force situation is that our police officers are not robots. And that's the expectation.
That's fair. That's fair.
The expectation that you're gonna pull out the gun for a person that's armed with a knife or a person that's armed with a gun and shoot them in the arm. It doesn't work like that. You're not trained to.
It doesn't work like that. And hold on. What were you about to say? Sorry.
I say you're never trained to shoot someone in the arm. It just there's no training for that.
Okay, so basically you said, like, and it's tough because, like, I want to understand more, right? And you're explaining a lot. You're explaining a whole lot. When you're saying a police officer is not trained for that, or at least from your perspective, right? It's super important for those who just tuned in. I'm one black man in North Carolina. There's one black dude, cop officer in Baltimore. And so we're not necessarily speaking for everyone, but it's important I give that disclaimer. But when you say that, it's hard to hear because it almost proves a point that the media keeps pushing and that some of us from the community or some people from the community are pushing by basically saying, like, you need retraining. Not saying that's the narrative I'm trying to push, but, like, some people just don't want to bury their family. They don't want, even if they don't want to bury their husbands. They don't want to bury their wives. They don't want to bury their girlfriends who get shot in the middle of the night sleeping with 20 shots into their apartment. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, by cops, by the way, Breonna Taylor. So, like, this is tough because I'm agreeing with a lot of what you're saying and disagreeing with a lot of what you say. This is a tough situation because I feel you. Like, I just, is something broken? Because for you to say we shouldn't expect it, at the same time saying we're not trained for it, but then at the same time we're like, hey, I don't want you to defund us. Just going back to the defund piece. This is so nuanced. You feel what I'm saying, bro? Like,
so let me explain to you what's broken. What's broken is our expectation of the culture. When a police officer gets out of the car, the first thing he's confronted with is this: a cell phone camera. He has his own camera on his body, but he's confronted with somebody, and I know this is a family show, so I'm not going to use the colorful language that we face. But the minute you get out of the car to address a situation, in Baltimore they have funny sayings, but it's, oh, look at dummy, look at him, look at this fool, look at this guy, look at this guy. Hey, officer, yo, don't touch my man, don't touch my man. He didn't do nothing. Why are we dealing with all those external things that are being presented to us? Those external distractions. That's what they are. The sticking the cell phone in a police officer's face. Look at him, man. He need to shape up. Man,
yeah.
Don't you touch your hair. Look, I'm trying to deal with this situation.
Yeah.
So there's a violation of personal space.
Yeah. And can I comment on that real quick? Sure. I think you bring up a fair point. Like, that perspective in defense of cops, I can totally understand. I was watching a video. I'm not sitting here, again, every situation is different. I was watching a video like that. It was like last week or something or whatever. And it was like, it did seem like it was excessive, I'll admit. Like, I'm watching it and it was like, I mean, you talk about like 3 or 4 dudes with their phones out recording it, but they were like dumb close. Like, I'm talking like right here, and the cops trying to deal with it. So I can understand the badgering. The unfortunate part of that is, like, it kind of comes with the job now. So that actually increases your stress level. But like the problems we're talking about, when you think about Rodney King, both of us are old enough when Rodney King happened, right? I was about 10 years old when Rodney King happened. You're just a little bit older. And that was on like a camcorder recorded like yards away, you know what I mean? And it got caught. But before then, there was no cameras, right? A lot of times people are like, yo, this stuff isn't even caught on camera. There's things that's happened that's never been caught on camera. So you understand why it exists though, right? Like, do you understand why it exists? Because
I totally get it. I totally get it because, you know, there were situations even before Rodney King. If we look at, you know, what happened at Edmund Pettus Bridge, you know, going back to the movie Glory. Like, it wasn't until America saw dogs and fire hoses being turned on African Americans on a bridge by a sheriff of a local county did we understand. You know, Representative John Lewis had his head split open at that bridge in Selma, Alabama. So when you have these scenarios where people are now starting to see the law enforcement arm projected in a aggressive manner, that's when you start to have more of a revolt. So we get it. As a police officer, we get it. We understand that there is a perception of us, but what happens is people don't understand it's criminal when I'm trying to engage. See, this is the new thing with cities across America. I get out the car, I'm addressing someone, somebody walks up with the cell phone, I tell them back up out of my face, and then they smack my hand away. And then the minute I turn my attention to them and grab them, then you have somebody else in that crowd that'll grab me and tell them to run. And so now it's, you know, he touched me for nothing. I wasn't even doing anything. And it's all about getting a lawsuit. So what they do is they try to antagonize police officers in order to get an officer in a situation where they react and then they can file a lawsuit. Because cities are not fighting it. Cities are not putting up a defense. They're just settling and paying. And in fact, we're now getting away from with the full intent of calling the police up for in the first place. If there is a scenario or a situation where a police officer has to intervene, having other people in the crowd, look, you can film all you want from right there or across the street. But the minute you get in my personal space and violate my space, that's an assault on me. And my mindset, I'm going home. And that's the mindset of every cop. I'm going home. I'm going home to my family and my kids because they expect me to come home. They expect me to do this job safely. And for you who are making a poor choice and a bad decision, you're not going to stop me from going home. That doesn't mean I'm going to kill you because but you're not going to kill me either. I'm going to protect myself.
Right. And I think that's fair. Like, and I want to make, I think that's fair from the perspective you're giving. It's hard to hear. It's offensive in some areas, not because you're trying to be offensive, but because it is offensive. Like you know, when you have, like for me, I got friends. I got single mom friends. I have fathers that are friends that are all police officers. And I don't want to get a phone call that they got killed in the line of duty. So I understand the perspective. Not going to sit there and argue with that at all. I'm not. I think the part that's tough is on the flip side, when we do have the incidences that have happened and have occurred by cops, especially or specifically what some would label bad cops or cops that are just, I don't know if ill-trained is right. Let's just keep it bad cops. Just keep it simple there. I think bad cops, it makes it hard to hear your perspective. And that's the thing about it. I don't even know what the comments are like right now. Like I probably look at comments and somebody's kind of like, yo, this dude's crazy. I don't know. But it's hard to hear it.
I know that I know the comments are blowing up.
But you understand what I'm trying to say, right? Like, I'm not saying you're wrong for what you said, because I do not want to get a phone call of a police officer friend of mine. Actually, I hate to hear it for anyone losing their life, but a friend of mine losing their life in the line of duty. But it is hard. Huh?
What's important and what's missed in all of this is the responsibility of the police chiefs and sheriffs. They're your police chiefs. They have to tell you why. They have to tell you why an officer did what they did. They should not tell. Look, I understand if it's an open case in their jurisdiction, just like I don't speak about open cases within the state of Maryland. But if there's an open case, they should tell you why. it doesn't take a rocket scientist. It doesn't take a master's degree. It doesn't take a police academy training. It doesn't take a law degree. It doesn't take a medical degree to understand that kneeling on a person's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds is going to result in their death. It doesn't take rocket science. You don't need a high school diploma to know that. You don't need to be certified and trained in any profession to know that. So it's wrong. That's wrong. That's what we saw in American policing less than 60 days ago. That person wore a uniform to work. Now, I guess it's in the criminal justice system, you have to wait, you have to be able to prove that that guy woke up that morning, put on his badge and his uniform, and decided to go kill someone that day. That's how you have to prove that malicious intent. However, when he found himself in a scenario where he was engaged physically with a combative person, I didn't see where he was combative, but someone that was having an anxiety attack, first of all, we should have never got there. That was a failure. It was an absolute failure on the leadership of Minnesota police, Minneapolis police. One, you have one police officer with 18 different complaints, 18 complaints, with assigned two trainees. You had two of those guys on that scene. One guy had 4 days on the job. The other one had 3 days on the job. So two of the guys had less than 1 week on the job as police officers, and they're with one training officer who had 18 complaints or 21 complaints in a 3-year span. That is a problem. That is a leadership problem.
So hold on.
It's a leadership problem.
You said that's not a what problem?
It's not a policing problem. That's a leadership problem.
No, but hold on. Let me ask you. Hold on. Can I, the leadership is coming from the police department, though, isn't it?
The leadership is coming from your mayor, who hires the police chief, who hires the district commander, who allowed that to happen.
Right, but all of that falls under the umbrella. And again, I'm probably not the smartest guy in the world for this, but all of that falls under the umbrella of policing. That is a policing problem, though.
Not. See, what happens is, who is left to pick up the pieces? The police union, which is me and my colleagues, we're left to pick up the pieces when it's a situation that's under the full control of the police chief, under the full control of the mayor. We don't, again, we already talked about this in defunding. The union doesn't have control of the budget. The union doesn't have control over what funds are allocated and where. But however, the union is always being blamed for everything that's wrong in policing. And the only thing, and I told you this when we first started, when we talked about the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights that, you know, some states have, the first thing I told you about that is this: as a union, we ensure due process. If there's a bad cop, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Follow the process and get rid of them. That's the responsibility of the police chief. If a person has an IID complaint or Internal Affairs Division complaint, do an investigation and get rid of them.
So can I ask this though? Like, it's funny because like I didn't want to, like, part of me is I'm always trying to make sure I'm staying in the middle. But it's like I'm trying to follow you on what you said, not because what you said was wrong. I'm trying to quantify it. When you said,
comments, by the way, I just looked at my phone. It's a lot of comments.
I just happened to click on it. There are a lot of comments. I'm hoping they're remaining civil. I have no clue.
We need this. We need this. We need this.
But like, I think it's hard because like when you say stuff like, and you gave, all right, let me be fair, right? Because again, I'm staying in the middle because what I'm doing when I pause is I'm recanting what was just said, right? Because a lot was said. You brought up a great point. You're right. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know not to kneel on the neck of a dude for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That is an individual responsibility. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Individual responsibility. Okay. The two people that you mentioned that was there for a couple days, like less than a week of experience, they're on the job. No excuses at all, but they're on the job, brand new, probably felt intimidated to even do anything. I don't know. The narrative seems to be the same, though, for other incidences that didn't result in death, where it feels like cops just stand there and not do anything. So I'm not going to dive into that just yet, but I just want to bring that up. And then you moved it up to saying it's the police chief and the mayor and et cetera, right? When you broke that down, to me, I can't see that outside of policing. Again, this may be my ignorance, but like, you just basically proved that it's a systemic issue.
The systemic issue lies on leadership. What happens is
so hold on, wait. I'm sorry. Not to cut you off or to be contentious. It relies on leadership, yes, but there's a responsibility of the individual who's taking those actions, correct?
Well, you should be able to self-police yourself in all things. In all aspects of life, you should be able to self-police yourself. But the minute you step outside of your role as a public servant, as a police officer, and commit a criminal act, you're a criminal. You're not representing the masses of policing and those that do this job in our profession the right way. You're representing yourself. You've gone rogue. So if that occurs, there's a criminal justice process for that. Criminally charge them, bring them before a judge, a jury of their peer or a judge, and if they are wrong, prosecute them. That's what the criminal justice system is. See, what happens is people have this misconception that cops just going around doing everything that they want to do and they get away with it. If they do it within policy and within the law, that's what, then if they don't violate policy and don't violate the law, then they haven't done anything wrong. But if they violate one of the two, they can be criminally charged or they can be administratively charged and fired. There's a system for that. It exists.
I'm totally not disagreeing with you. I think everything you're saying is true. I just had like a small epiphany, maybe. It's how far are we from what you're saying policies exist from the actions being taken by those who are supposed to carry out those policies?
I'm gonna tell you, take politics out of policing and you'll see a better police force across the country. Take your mayors, your county executives, your governors, take the president, take them all out of policing and take the politics out of it. Because you know what those guys are doing? And I don't fault them when they're getting paid six-figure salaries to be heads of these police departments and they don't want to lose their job and lose their house and lose their family. So I get it. They want to keep their jobs. And so you have a mayor or someone that just because they're elected in an elected position, they feel as though that they have the right to tell their subordinate, which they do. The police chief works for a mayor. The sheriff is elected by the people. So when the people are not getting the results of a sheriff, they vote him out. Vote him out. Mm-hmm. Same with mayors. If your mayor of your town or your city is not overseeing the police department and crime is out of control and you have a out of control police department, vote him out. But to turn around and put it on the officer, the street cop, and say that he is responsible for all the wills in society, the ills of society, it's wrong. And I think we have to speak out more against that. And rather than talking about defunding police, we need to talk about defending police. Because most of the guys and girls that I know that get up every morning and go to do this job, they do it with the right intentions and they want to do it the right way every day.
Yeah, and you know, again, this whole conversation, by the way, I'm just repeating myself intentionally because I don't know who's consistently watching everything. This conversation is to allow you to be able to make the statements that you want to make from your perspective. And we talked about this even in a pre-conversation. I will not stand for somebody saying that the perspective you're given is wrong when you are a cop and you're living a life and you're defending others. I totally understand why you're saying defend the police versus defund the police. I get it. I may not agree with everything, but I get it, and you should be able to say that because this is the United States of America and we all have the right to say what we want to say. And I think this nuance is so difficult because the older I get, for me, I'm pushing 40. I have more police officer friends. I have more friends that are in that world, and I'll text them, "Thank you for your service." I'll see a cop. I'll say like, "Look, man, appreciate it." I'll say, "Hey, look, I'm praying for you." I say, "Hey, I love you, man. I love you, woman." Whatever it is, I'm with you on all of that. No argument there. No argument there. I think when there's a problem that does exist, and we might as well say it, one thing we've never actually said in this conversation, not once, And I don't know if it was your intention, but it wasn't mine intentionally. Outside of the word urban is the Black community. And I'm just using the word now, Black community. Specifically, it's hard to erase the experiences that people have that's outside of the media, right? Inside of our hearts, inside of our minds, inside of our triggers, inside of our anxieties that exist. So for me, like I had an incident. It wasn't significant in my opinion, I guess. At the age of 13 years old, in 1994, there was no cop camera. There was nothing there was no iPhone, there was no Android. I'm cool, nothing really, like I didn't get killed. Obviously, I'm sitting here with you talking, but I remember that. And then you have the stories that are worse than that, right? How you can't just erase that. And I think sometimes when a cop, intentionally or not, gets defensive because people are being offensive, right? Like defund the police, NWA, F the police and all this other stuff. It almost sounds like you're not willing to listen to the fact that, there's pain here. And so when we look at George Floyd, when he was killed, and people, one thing when I talk about here is stats, right? The reason why I didn't want to bring up stats, which I have no problem talking about stats, and that's probably something you're more versed in, is because the one stat that I think can never actually be captured is excessive force stats over X amount of years that didn't result in death. Because lots of times the argument is, like more white people are killed than Black people, which is probably true. There's more white people than Black people. Fine. Like I get that. Fine. That's no arguments there. But like, you get what I'm saying? Like, I sound like I'm probably venting and rambling a bit. Like, I can't erase that. And there's so many men and women that can't erase those experiences. Forget CNN, forget MSNBC, forget Fox, forget all of that stuff. I wake up, I go outside, I go to the store in my Acura, and I get stopped because a dude just wanted to stop me just because no reason.
So let me draw you and your listeners in to this world, and I'm gonna try to do it.
You talking about when you say this world, because I want to make sure it be fair to when you make a statement. You mean the world of policing, right?
It's going to be a broad statement. The world of American policing.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure we quantify so that way the audience can hear you and not feel all of a sudden defensive, which they probably are, or maybe whatever. I just want to make sure we quantify that.
So what happens is, in the world of American policing, you have an incident. We had it here in Baltimore in 2015. When I was giving my intro and I talked about working at my alma mater, Carver High School in Baltimore City, I was a school police officer assigned there. I became the basketball coach at Carver High School. I became the assistant baseball coach at Carver High School. And in those days at working at Carver High School, I had the experience to run into a student who stood out to me as a person who I had a great relationship. That person wound up in 2015 being involved in a police encounter that resulted in his death, and the world got to know about Baltimore City because of Freddie Gray. Mm-hmm. So I had a great relationship with Freddie Gray and his twin sister, who didn't like me as much, Frederica Gray. So I brought up Freddie Gray in this world of American policing because as a result of his in custody death, we have what's now in our city a consent decree. And so with these consent decrees, it's an agreement between the U.S. Department of Justice and a city that that the city has had a pattern and practice of encounters with citizens that there needs to be a systemic change. So that change could be your technology, that change could be your policies and procedures, the way that you're structured and everything. So once you make that agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice, a federal monitor, a judge, oversees the implementation of all of these various policies and things like that.
Yeah.
So I said Baltimore 2015. All right. Then you have a city like Cleveland, who's now in consent decree right now. All right. Then you have a city like Seattle, who was in consent decree. You have a city like Oakland, who was in consent decree. You have Chicago is going to go into consent decree. Atlanta is going to go into consent decree. Now I'm laying this groundwork because what happens is this. You have these cable news networks, the 3-letter networks, and I'm not going to name them, but let people decide who they are. They have these experts that come on via Zoom and have conversations with a reporter like you and they say, in my experience over the last 30 years, we need to change policing, we need to do this, and they are the police reform hustlers. There's a local station here in Baltimore who has uncovered, this is not my doing, this is a local news reporting station, has uncovered that the same people that sat on Seattle, Oakland, and now Cleveland and Baltimore consent decrees are going across the nation, a group of about 20 are billing these cities at a rate of about $15,000 to $18,000 per person per month.
Which person? You talking about the people who are going out and doing, like they're the ones who are going out.
So they're not necessarily going out. There are groups of people that are on these monitoring teams.
Okay.
They have a cookie cutter plan. It's just one plan, and they're going to fit their one plan into all of these different cities. And they're experts who are retired cops, who are retired lawyers, some active duty people. Their whole circle are going to push this reform train on every network and say, we need changes in policing. We need reform. We need reform. We got to reform the police department. And that is job security for them because they're now consultants. And their consultant fee is $15,000 to $18,000 a month. Now, granted, for me, if you are able to get it and you are able to convince a city to hire you, so be it. I'm not mad at you because that's how you make your money. However, Baltimore's needs, Cleveland's needs, Seattle's needs, Oakland's needs, everybody's needs are different. So why are we going around looking at these cookie cutter plans and plugging in the same circle of people? And I'll send it to you so you can post it on your page.
Right.
This circle of people who are just getting paid. And what happens is you enter into a 5-year agreement. And I heard it yesterday, like the commissioner here in Baltimore, he said, oh yeah, we're into year 3 of a 5-year plan, but we're not going to meet the mark in 5 years. So every month, these 20 people, $15,000 to $18,000 a month, these 20 people are billing cities to pay for this program. And what happens is a lot of these people don't even ever set foot in the city. They don't even come.
They're just sitting at home like me.
They're sitting at home reviewing what is emailed to them by people that they hire to collect data. Now, I think that communities need to know that this is what's sweeping the country. And again, I'm not against it because hopefully one day I can be some sort of consultant to somebody when my career is over. So I'm not begrudging these men and women who are doing this for a living post-career. But it's dangerous. It's very dangerous to force this narrative on the active duty men and women who are just trying to do what they can to get by and who are trying to do what they can at work to make a living, an honest living for their family, because so many people are affected by this. Again, I talked about crime and violence in our city. Right now, Baltimore has 182 or 183 homicides, and we are in the middle of a national pandemic. 180 people have been killed violently in this city. 183 people. Now, had 183 died for any other thing outside of the hands of gun violence, local street gun violence, it will be an epidemic and it will be a public health crisis. And I think that we need to really, really focus and prioritize what's real, and let's stop this pandering, to certain groups. Let's stop this. Let's dump all of society's ills on policing. Because it wasn't police officers who introduced crack cocaine to our communities in the 1980s. It wasn't police officers who decided that they wanted to wage war on drugs. That was a issue. I mean, that was a scenario that was done by people that were elected leaders, that made the laws, that forced the police officers to enforce them, that started this crime syndicate.
And I'm not going to debate you there on that. I think when you are quote unquote law enforcement, right, your job is to enforce the law. And if laws are written, and I think this is what you're trying to say, if laws are written, you're out there trying to just enforce what has been written. Is that a fair statement? Did I say that right?
You're doing what you're told. Because these same groups of people, they create things like broken windows theories and things like that. So the broken windows theory of policing is, if you go into a community and you see a lot of broken windows, you know, you need to start enforcing the low-level crimes, and then if you enforce the low-level crimes, then the bigger things will start to get into control. So that's a theory, and these concepts come every few years. Like in Baltimore, we had something after that, which was called zero tolerance. Just lock everybody up.
Right. But then up in New York, remember they had stop and frisk, right?
So it's cute little things every few years that they come up with, these cute concepts.
So what you just did though, and first off, I'm going to go back and watch this. Everything you just shared was huge. Especially, I was aware to some degree at a high level around, because I want to give respect to that. Around, they're hiring retired people to go in and consult, right? And I was aware of it at a high level, not in the ways that you just described it, right? Obviously with the contracts and going out and getting money per person and so on and so forth, and going in the city. I wasn't fully aware of that. My job is, I'm not a journalist. My job is to actually be educated in this conversation as well. So I appreciate you actually sharing all of that, because that's something I was not aware of. I think it's a perspective that a lot of people don't have, because of the polarization of the other side, which I think is what you're trying to say, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I want to be respectful of that. And
yes, they're showing you this, but there's something else going on down here.
Okay. Yeah. And then also you went through the history of explaining the impacts of it and the fact that it's now spreading to different cities, right? Chicago, Seattle. Oh, it's about to happen in Chicago. It's about to happen in Atlanta. It's happened in Seattle. You've mentioned these different cities. So that's huge. I appreciate you sharing that. And I definitely would, for me personally, I hope the viewers do it. Dig into it, right? Get the education on that. And that's why this conversation is important, because you're going to have a lot of people probably in the comments that's pissed off at you, not you, but you as in a cop, because of what we see going on. A lot of people probably are defending you. And then probably just some people in between. But I think it's important for all sides to hear all pieces of this and all aspects, because that was a pretty critical piece of information. I think the part that is hard to swallow is, again, this goes back maybe to media. Like you said, you brought up the 3 letters. There's several 3 letters, 4 letters, 5 letters, probably words that can be said too. That, that could be covered. But no, I think the media has done its job by informing us of what it wanted us to hear, or what they wanted us to hear. But it goes back to having these conversations that removes that out the window, and just having conversations with people like yourself to do that. It's just hard because, again, taking the media out of it, we have our experiences, meaning people have their experiences. And cops, there's a perception right now, and I believe it's sort of true, aren't being held accountable for the actions that they commit. One thing that's really big right now is, arrest the person who did this, okay? And I'm pivoting intentionally here to go down the topics. Arrest those who killed Breonna Taylor. That's frustrating. Is it fair to ask that question? I think so. But what's frustrating is that like perceptively nothing's happening because the cops are protected. But what do you say to that? You feel what I'm saying?
So what I will say to that is there has been action taken by the police chief. Those guys have been, two of the four, I believe, have been terminated already. And homicide and death investigations are very serious allegations, and you need to, before you start charging people with murder and capital murder and things like that, you need to do a thorough investigation. Now, what the city of Louisville is doing, I don't know. And I don't claim to know where they are in the investigation. But I think it's really important that your viewers understand and you understand that there needs to be a thorough investigation, and let the facts take you where the facts go. Because we can all have our own perception, but we can't have our own facts. So whatever the facts are in that case, because I, like most of us, was not aware of that scenario of what happened. And then it was briefly mentioned, and then we had George Floyd, and then we had Ahmaud Arbery, which is a whole nother issue with defunding.
But I will tell you, why though, right?
We had all these situations back to back, and it was just like a lot to digest.
Yeah, I will say the one thing, let me touch Breonna Taylor. I'm sure there's a lot of unmentioned things, non-mentioned stories of deaths, right? I mean, when you think about it, the Arbery thing kind of came up late, right? Late, meaning it happened, but it took national attention weeks later. But there's another area when it comes to, and I'm going to talk about this in a future episode, it's our Black women. There's the attention on them seems to be it's just not as focused as it possibly should be. Again, we can say it's perception. I think it's reality. And that's probably why something like a Breonna Taylor can be this extended out, or that, you know what I'm saying? Again, there's other stories, but it just sucks. It just sucks all the way around. And I don't know. I'm part of the reason why I sound a little disheveled is because I feel like everything you said was definitely on point and was needed to be said. I think the part that I'm having a hard time with, to be straight up, and I know that you have no problem being straight up, is that I still I'm not trying to say you have to take you're not going to take responsibility for every cop in the United States of America.
Absolutely, I wouldn't.
Yeah, there's no way possible. But there's just there's almost like this level of man, can somebody just say, yeah, we messed up? At the individual level, and just not wait for the law to defend them, not wait for a union to defend them, even if they're wrong.
So here's what's lost.
You understand what I'm trying to say?
But here's what's lost in that.
Okay.
I didn't defend Derek Chauvin, who was
right.
I didn't defend him, and I won't.
Right.
I won't defend that action. I just won't.
Right.
I mean, what I saw, I didn't like. I didn't like it for to see a man, beg and plead for his mother, but I also didn't like what I saw in the Ahmaud Arbery case. I didn't like it because it's vigilantism is what you get when you fully defund and abolish police. You get people taking the law into their own hands, and then they try to, take somebody into custody over somebody else's property. I didn't even get into, and I talked about the leadership stuff with what happened with George Floyd. It goes deeper than that. And I really didn't get that deep into why are we sending police officers to deal with a counterfeit $20 bill? That's one of the things. Take it off our plate. Why are we dealing with that?
But you're not saying I'm with you. You wonder why they're there, but
why were they there? Why did you say
No, I'm with you, but you're not saying that is in defense of it. You're just making a point, correct?
Making a point that it's something wrong with sending 4 cops for a guy passing a counterfeit 20. That's something wrong with that.
Yeah, but that goes back to the fact that with some of us who think it's going to be escalated more when there's a Black person involved. Is that true? Is that true? I'm not saying that that's true. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm not going to I'm not saying you're trying to create some spin narrative on you. but that is an argument. You know,
Look, in
you know
3
what I
years,
mean?
I haven't responded to a call for service as a cop, and the cops that I represent. We don't respond to calls for service and pull up and say, "Ah, that's a white guy." Oh,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah,
black
yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah.
We don't even get that. It's not even that deep into it, whether that's the victim or the suspect. You know,
Okay.
we don't see that, or at least I don't. I mean, I've never saw that. I just saw a human being or a person that needs help, or a human being or a person that's on the other side that needs to be brought to justice. Whether
And I
they,
can't, and I'm not going to sit here and it's unfair. That's why I was real careful when I said like the perception, because like, and this is where I gotta make sure I cover both sides. Like it's unfair to automatically just say every single cop walks out and sees every single black person as a threat. However, I'm sorry, only black people as a threat. However, when you are black and you come up in a situation where your interactions with the cops have been primarily unhealthy, it's a fair reason why you see it that way. And I hope you understand what I'm saying. Like even speaking for yourself, and I want to slide to some questions. I think it's important real quick. But one question I want to jump to, even speaking for yourself, like growing up in Baltimore, and this is one question that came in a second ago, is like, what were your experiences with the police growing up in the west side of Baltimore? That was one question that came up.
So I had a few.
For those of you, and I'm moving to questions just so you guys know.
Yeah, so I had a few healthy relationships. I did have a negative encounter when I was about 15 years old with a police officer who eventually was fired for something else he did, but not even involving me. But for the most part, I had healthy encounters, and I thought that being a police officer growing up was a noble profession and something that we should look to get into as a means of helping our community. And then it became something like when I got into it, like, man, I can really make a career out of this and I can make a living out of this and raise my family, making the money that we make as police officers. I can make a good, honest living.
Gotcha. And that was the one incident that you had. And then what about people in your community to the left and right of you? How was that, their experience with cops?
So I'm be honest with you, a lot of my childhood friends, they had different experiences because they made different choices. They made different choices and their experiences were born out of their choices. And then, you know, as adults, when we look back and they say, you know what, man, you know, I wish I wouldn't have did this. I wish I was smart enough to not do that. And then they call and say, hey, man, why don't y'all do like they used to do back in the day? You know, why don't y'all lock them up, throw away the key? And I'm like, that's not what, you know, people want these days. You know, it's just not even that way anymore. So yeah, so it's like you live and you learn, and as you're maturing, your experiences are based off of your own encounters.
All right, I'm gonna slide to another one. So this was from a friend. Her name is really Tashala. I'm not making it up. Tashala, what are your views on rerouting certain 911 calls to other professionals and taking some of that responsibility from the police? We kind of covered that a little bit, but the only reason I'm picking that one is I don't think we really went too deep into it, but maybe we could just spend a minute on that real quick.
I believe the town of St. Petersburg is going to start doing that, where they're going to start taking 911 calls and shifting the priorities.
Got you.
You know, you have another.
As long as it's not defunding you, right?
Yeah. You know, again, take some of the stuff off our plate. You know, certain stuff we shouldn't be responding to, but you know, we're happy to respond to emergency situations. There's another town that wants to evaluate having traffic enforcement officers handle car stops. Now, the one thing that you get off of car stops, there were two main cases when I was trained as a young police officer that lead to the death of a police officer: traffic stops and domestic disputes. So now you're going to put unarmed civilian city workers in the position to try to stop a car and give someone a ticket for running a stop sign or running a red light or not having a tag light out or one of those different things. That is unfair to that person.
Yeah, that's risky. And I guess every town, you bring up a good point, because even when you just said it, I was kind of like, I thought about the episode of Martin where the dude was, I don't know if you watched Martin growing up, but the guy who was at the shoe store, and he didn't even have a gun, and he had the clip-on tie. He was like, "Come on, man, you're not even a real cop. You're a rent-a-cop." And but if there was real danger, it could be pretty serious. So no, I appreciate you jumping into that. I'm gonna go to another question. This is from Mike Pierce. What do you think most cops are required? Why do you think most cops are required to wear cameras and have an entire department dedicated to investigating the police wrongdoing? I think that is a very good question. I wanted to wait to ask that question intentionally because that's a conversation within itself. So I'll repeat it one more time. This is from Mike Pierce. Why do you think most cops are required to wear cameras and have an entire department dedicated to investigating police wrongdoing?
So about 6 years ago, here in the state of Maryland, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a push to have police departments use body cameras. And when we had these task force and these study groups about body cameras, as police officers, we were reluctant because there were some privacy issues. Whereas if you're a cop and you're sitting writing a police report and your wife calls or your kids call, you didn't want, privacy issues. And then, you have certain things that you would come into, you worry about violating people's HIPAA laws and things like that. Right. So we had a little bit of pushback on some of the things that should be captured and shouldn't be captured. So those things worked out. We initially were totally against it. But what we found when looking back at the data, body cameras exonerate police officers way more than they find wrongdoing.
But is that a bad thing, though? That's not a bad thing, though. Oh, okay, all right, cool.
No, not a bad thing. So when you have a citizen that says that the officer cursed at me, or the officer hit me, or the officer did something, and then you review the body camera footage and it's not there, then you can have another conversation with the citizen and say, nah, that allegation is wrong. So there's a whole group of police officers called the Internal Affairs Division, or ID, or whatever they call it.
Right. Yeah.
Those guys and girls are the accountability arm of policing. Those are the last people that street cops want to talk to. You don't ever want to go talk to internal affairs for anything. You just don't. So they are the accountability arm. They're their own separate guys and girls. And then you have some people say, well, you can't trust the cops to investigate cops. Well, you want somebody that knows your experiences, that has their own professional experiences and have their own background to understand why you did this and why you did that. And then they can interpret the rules and regulations or the policies and procedures of the police department.
Yeah, I think, well, first off, appreciate you doing that and saying that. I think the part that is concerning, and speaking for myself, and it wouldn't surprise me some people watching this are thinking the same thing, is that corruption exists everywhere. So it's almost like, it's like, okay, the police are policing the people. Who's policing the police? Then who's policing those who are policing the police, right? It just kind of keeps going back and forth because corruption exists everywhere, right? And I'm with you. Like, there's good that stuff exists, and why it exists. I don't know if you fully answered that question, but why it exists is what people are trying to understand. And it was created primarily, I'm assuming, either internal affairs or the cameras to protect the citizens. But what you just said is the byproduct of that also helped with exonerating cops in that process. But is it fair to?
It's the accountability arm. Let me give you a quick scenario.
Okay.
In medicine, and I love my doctors because they're the best in
medicine, right? I just want to make sure your mic.
Medicine, yes. In medicine, I remember a classmate of mine. She went in for foot surgery, and she was getting an ankle surgery on the ankle, and she died. What was her family left with? Complications. There's no explanation, no anything, no investigation. I don't know whatever happened, but she was going to get her ankle fixed. And it was complication. Nobody knows what that means. Nobody knows what that means. So when you look at medical malpractice, and you look at how that can relate to policing, you have to have an investigatory arm that understands the job, that can look at it and say, these mistakes were made.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would never dispute the fact that the investigative arms exist. But the point I was making is the concern around the accountability or the corruption that may still exist even within those systems.
Well, as a
Maybe that's something you can't address, but like,
as a trained police officer, I can't tell you what mistakes were made in a malpractice case because I don't know. I can't tell you what a school teacher did wrong in teaching a curriculum because I don't know. But if we expect the average Joe Blow citizen to critique and make a determination on whether or not a police officer was right or wrong for a split-second decision. A split-second decision.
Oh, you're
talking about who was policing the police.
Right.
We want, there's a whole thing about putting citizens on hearing boards and things like that. Unless the citizen is trained into policy and procedure and what a police officer will do in this scenario, a reasonable and prudent police officer, unless they're trained in that, then they're doing themselves a disservice because they don't know. I don't know. I don't know what a teacher will do. I don't know what an IT person should do to fix a computer. I don't know if they.
No, I mean, and I think you're bringing up valid points because it's a perspective that I don't have. Like, I personally don't have it. Maybe some people who are listening do. I personally don't have it. So I think that's fair based on the fact that that's a perspective that I don't have. I think a lot of it is, this goes back to law enforcement. I'm going to use the umbrella term. It's like, and I hate the term defunding because I feel like defunding, anything with the DE in front of it sounds like it's taking away, but it's like words almost don't mean anything nowadays. But it's almost like really we need a shift in the funds of how we do policing. Again, I know you're like, don't take anything from me, but get my point is you're saying how come they're not trained? Like you said that on a couple points in the conversation about, the health professionals not being trained properly or where's the database. You brought up the same thing just now about the, oh man, now I'm having a brain fart, but you just brought up a similar thing around training, huh?
About medical.
Yeah. And my thing is like, that's where the funding, I think where some of this argument's going, some of the funding can help once you get the systems in place. But again, it's city, county, state. It's all about, because it just doesn't mean you just wash it over the entire United States of America, because in Hawaii, they may not even need that, right? Just for the heck of it. So I'm with you there. Let me jump to another question. So it almost is, let me see. We kind of covered that a little bit. The go home thing. So this is interesting, all right? David Marshall brought up a good point, and this goes back to the conversation we had earlier around cops want to go home. I want my cop friends to come home too, but so do I, right? You have fathers and mothers who are like, when my teenage son or daughter leaves the house or my adult son or daughter leave the house, I want them to come home safely, period. But then definitely, with the aspect of dealing with police overall. So again, this question from David Marshall is, does that go home argument work for civilians against officers? Like, and I don't know if he means it this way, but I take that as like, do you as a cop also think to yourself, this person needs to get home to his family or her family?
Every police encounter every encounter I have with a citizen and I'm acting in a law enforcement capacity, I feel as though that person needs to go home to their family.
Okay.
Even if I had to take them before a judge to decide whether or not they get bail or they held bail, look, it's just my job to get you from here. Look, there's an allegation against you. This what the investigation reveals. I got to get you to the jail. The judge lets you out, they let you out. But we're going to do this the safe way. That's my goal, for them to go home and for me to go home. Now, in the event that their priorities change and they want to attack, I have to determine whether are they trying to hurt me or are they trying to get away?
Right.
And there's a difference. There's a big difference. If a person is attacking you and trying to pound you into the ground, that's an attack. That's not trying to get away from the cops. So there's a difference. And if I feel as though, or if I'm put in a situation where a person is trying to run, it's my job to chase them.
So what about so you bring up a good point. What about the people who get shot in the back?
So, all right.
And I don't want to use Rashard Brooks because he turned around. I know the narrative from that perspective, and I think it's a fair argument, not because I agree with it, but he turned around with a potential weapon in his hand. But what about the people who get shot in the back?
So,
if they run.
So you're taught in firearm school that you can't shoot a person in the back. However, when someone's running and they point something at you, whether it's a soda or whatever, if they point something at you, you can't determine what that is. And if that person's back is turned, you should not be shooting someone in the back. But you can't change the facts if someone is pointing something behind them.
But that's why I said, let's take the Rayshard Brooks analogy out, because you brought it in. Forget Rayshard Brooks.
I'm talking about Rayshard Brooks because
I know, but that's his scenario. We can talk about any. I'm talking about a dude is running or a lady is running, and they get shot in the back. You're saying what?
There's a case out of South Carolina where the police officer shot a gentleman in the back running away because he took his taser. It was caught on camera, on cell phone camera, and that police officer's in jail.
So it is. So you're saying it's wrong.
Don't shoot anybody in the back running away from you. Chase them.
Right.
Chase them. Chase them.
Yeah, and then in your defense, which I've talked to a couple of cops about this a little bit. I understand it sucks to see another person lose his life. I want to bring the Rayshard Brooks thing in. I understand the perspective of him turning around, and I don't know what it's like to be a cop. When you're watching video, and this is to your point, I'm gonna go to your side straight up. When you're watching video, it's almost like anything. Watching sports, watching a boxing match, you're like, dude, why ain't he throw a left? Why ain't he throw a hook? Because the commentators can see things that the person who's actually in the middle of it can't necessarily see. In that case, I mean, the cop knew that it was his taser, but at the same time, he felt threat. Huh?
Did he know?
Well, hold on. I could have sworn that was actually stated that he was aware that it was a taser.
Well, I don't know.
What you just said though is almost like question baiting, right? He's like, did he know? I'm like,
no, I don't know. I don't know if he made that statement that he knew that it was his taser.
Okay, so I'll check again, but I could have sworn I read that.
Is this the mere fact of someone pointing something at you that has a laser beam on it, and then you hear the actual discharge of that, whether that's a taser or a 22 or a 38 or whatever. The mere fact that someone turns and points something at you and fire it is a problem. That's a problem in and of itself.
Yeah, and I'm not going to, again, for the Rayshard Brooks situation, again, I hate another person losing their life, another brother losing his life. That's such a tough situation. So I totally can empathize with that.
I'm not tone deaf in the fact that gentleman lost his life.
Yeah.
I'm not tone deaf, and I do feel for his family that are left to deal with pick up the pieces with that. I do feel that, and I think that there's a lot to that case, of how things played out and how he thought that he was in Forest Park, Georgia, which is a whole 20 minutes away from where he actually was. And, some people say, why didn't he park his car and let him walk? And, so, if I let you park your car and sleep it off and I pull off and then I pull away and then you get into an accident and kill someone's grandmother, they'll be in the city because I had the opportunity and I had the duty to do something. So I can't just let you park and keep control of the car and sleep it off. It just doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. But some people feel as though that should have been reasonable to do. Because the same way we looked at the surveillance camera footage of the Wendy's, you would have saw my first encounter with you, and the telltale signs would have said, you should have known, based on your training, because you remember, this is what they said, based on your training, you should have known that he was inebriated and too drunk to drive. You should have known that, based on your training. So there's a whole bunch of twists and turns when it comes to that.
It's a complicated case, to be honest with you. Like I'm not making I can't make any final judgment calls on that. Number one, I'm not a jury. I'm not a cop. I'm not a judge.
Finally, we have in that case the interim police chief who made it clear to say that he felt as though this is an African American man too, a black guy, who said that he feels as though the African American district attorney who's in a runoff election, his charges were rushed and they did not allow the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to complete their investigation. That in and of itself, when you have the police chief of Atlanta saying that, because what that tells me, over 20 years, that they went to the police chief that was there and said, this is what we're going to do. And she said, I'm not going to be a part of that. And she left. Right. That's what that tells me.
Wow. No, I mean, that's wild. That says a lot, man. I'm gonna go to another question.
Sure.
This is a question from Mr. Carter. What's the difference between having a citizen review board and a jury? What do you think about that?
So a citizen review board is someone that looks at the administrative case against a police officer, and a jury is somebody that looks at a criminal case against any person, whether it's a regular citizen or a police officer. So there's two different groups of people.
Got you. And okay, that's fair. But would they work together? That's just a furthering question. Like, can you have an entire case that's like being viewed?
So or something? If someone has an allegation against them, let's say it's a police officer, he has a criminal allegation against them. The criminal case takes precedent over an administrative case. So that criminal case has to go all the way through the judicial system. Once it's finished in the judicial system, then there's a determination made whether or not the police officer violated the administrative procedures of the police department, the policies and procedures. And so you then go from a jury situation, and as a citizen in this nation, in the United States, you have a choice to pick a judge or a jury trial. So if you pick a jury of your peers, it's picked from the voter rolls of the state, and then they make a determination of guilt or innocence based upon beyond a reasonable doubt.
Got you.
All right. So that there's it's beyond a reasonable doubt that you did that. So that's the standard. An administrative case has less of a standard to meet, where the civilian can look at that, or civilian board will look at it, and it's based off the preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. It's the lowest standard bearing level that we have in our system. So is it 51% that you did this allegation or not? Mm-hmm. Is it more likely than not? Not whether or not beyond a reasonable doubt, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, it's more likely than not. So that standard is very low.
That makes sense. I'm gonna take this final question and we're gonna wrap up. There was one that came in from Steve Weiss. Do you believe there are outside organizations like Antifa creating chaos?
I haven't studied Antifa enough to know what
that's just an example. That's just an example. Just
so I do think that what we saw here in Baltimore after the death of George Floyd, what we saw was there were outside influences that flew into Baltimore because they saw the way things went down in 2015, and they were hell-bent on destruction. In fact, my friends at Baltimore Police, their intel division, was successful in finding pallets of bricks being left in certain areas of the city in order to inflict destruction on the city. But it was the work of our community groups, our faith-based leaders, and regular citizens that identified the perpetrators and the instigators, and they identified them and pointed them out to the police, and basically said, y'all not going to come and destroy our city. Take that to where you live. And so what happens is when there's a crime of opportunity, there are groups of people that come together and they're just hell-bent on destruction, and they'll find cities to go to and pretty much instigate and incite riots. So there are groups that exist, and they're both on the left and on the right.
So no, I appreciate that. I want to go ahead and come to a close with this question. It's funny, a question just came in that actually was where I was going to go to, and then we'll wrap up. This was actually my longest conversation I expected it to be, but it's obvious because there's so much to unpeel here, and to unpack it. And I'm one guy. Depending on who you get, you never know. My goal was not to get you on here to bash you. You already knew that. It was to more converse like we did. Conversation. Is it fair to think and believe that you as an officer have to live by a higher standard than everybody else.
Absolutely. And that's based on, we should be held to a higher standard because we have the authority to take someone's freedom and the constitutional authority in a split second to take someone's life. So with that expectation, we should be held to a higher standard.
And in turn, would it also be fair to state that the reason why normal citizens have expectations that may seem outlandish to cops, and to some degree, is it fair to have certain types of expectations? And that's why, based on the fact that
it is fair. It is fair, but within reason, there is a degree of error that should be expected when you're dealing with the human element. Just because people are in a position and they have certain training doesn't mean that they're laser focused robots that don't have feelings, that don't have external distractions, that is not, that doesn't mean that they don't have marital problems or raising a troubled child or going through a divorce or dealing with all of these or have a sick parent at home.
And so, I saw, yeah, go ahead. So
there should be a reasonable expectation that there is a degree of humanality that needs to be taken into account when judging whether or not a police officer maliciously did something versus someone that made an honest mistake. And everybody is not setting out to violate someone's rights just for the sake of being malicious. In some cases, you should not be in a position to handcuff someone and then say, oh, you know what, you're not the right person. I'm going to give you a stop receipt stating that I had a citizen contact because investigation showed that you're not the right person. Mm-hmm. And then have that officer in turn investigated and terminated and said, he only stopped me because I'm Black. Well, that wasn't the case. There were other factors that led that police officer to stop you. And once it was determined that you were not the correct person, you would then let go. So don't just say, let's not pile on this guy or this girl or this police officer. Let's not pile on them just because we have the ability to do something. There is a degree of error when you're dealing with the human element.
Yeah, and in all fairness, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said there. I think, except for maybe, sometimes, I will, again, I can't erase my experience. I will say that sometimes things happen because I'm Black. But to your point, not only because of, and it may have nothing to do with that at all. So I want to be fair across the board in this conversation, which is always difficult. But I want
real quick, right there, that point. What we've done in American policing, at least in my jurisdiction, we have done the training of identifying implicit bias because we all have biases that we need to look at. If you see a person with a motorcycle jacket, sleeveless, a vest, with a chain and cowboy boots and a bandana, you're going to assume that they're a biker.
Yeah.
That they're part of a biker group or a biker gang.
Right.
And just the way that person want to dress. Same thing. If you have an internal bias or implicit bias, you should not view a young man that's walking between, as a citizen, you should not view a young man that's walking home from the convenience store with a pack of Skittles in his pocket and a hoodie on as a threat. Right. And we have to identify our own internal biases. And as police officers, we're not immune to that, of having that inherent bias, that implicit bias. So as citizens, we need to look at that as well.
I appreciate you saying that cops have their own biases, because it is true. Because they're human. Because you're human. Because we're human, and we all have our own biases. The only difference between the actions I can commit with my bias versus the actions you commit with your bias is you have a higher authority, and we're holding you to a higher standard. And that's something that's important, where your biases need to be in greater check. If that's not something you like to hear, then let me know. But need to be in greater check because of the responsibility you have as a police officer. So I want to close though, because we're long on this one, but this has been a very healthy conversation. I could not go into everything. You could not go into everything. I'm sure you got notes. I got notes. I'm like, dang, I ain't touched that. I ain't touched that. But I want to just wrap this up into a perspective to be balanced. We as just American citizens, no matter what your job is, all have different perspectives that makes it very unique for us to be able to get up every day and go live our lives, whatever that may be. In this conversation, we had a very, very real conversation with a police officer, a VP of the Fraternal Order of Police, the union, who's also representing and trying to protect the perspective that he has. And there's nothing wrong with that perspective at all. Is it something that we like to hear? Not all the time, no. Is everything on this conversation something that I like to hear? Probably not. But I will say this, we are all human, and we all need to be able to take a moment to hear the other side to really get an understanding of what we're judging. I know those who are watching have friends that are police officers and people that are involved in law enforcement, and we love them. And we appreciate what they do, because if something happened here at the house, I'm calling 911 and I'm hoping a cop shows up to help me out. But we do have issues that have occurred over the last God knows how many years where police brutality, that term was not used once tonight at all, I don't believe. Police brutality, killings, and behavior that has been negative across the board, especially to people of African-American descent, has been pretty aggressive and has been pretty heightened. And the fear that a lot of us have and the frustration that we have with the law enforcement officers because of that is real. But it doesn't necessarily mean that one side should negate what the other person is, or the other side is feeling. We need to come together and try our best to understand what's going on, what the laws are. I mean, Sergeant Clyde brought that up, I mean, amazingly close to an hour or so ago around the laws and the people who put these laws together and the people who put in place that make these decisions that may put officers in a tough spot unnecessarily. So in this long ending, I just want us to be able to hopefully go back, listen to this conversation, take what we've learned from Sergeant Clyde Boatwright, who I really thank for even taking the time to have this conversation with me. And for those who tuned in, thank you guys so much. This was an amazing, dynamic conversation. And I hope to actually, if he's willing to, bring him back for a more pointed conversation so we can help hopefully further the education. Is there anything for you, Sergeant Boatwright, that you'd like to say to the audience before we end?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I just want our listening audience and viewing audience to humanize police officers again. I think now is not the time to hear sob stories about cops and things like that. Now is not the time for cops to want to be praised for the little things. I mean, it was little more than 19 years ago. It was police officers and firefighters running into the Twin Towers. And the fallout from that was, we need to support our police. We understand that some of the things that some people who wore the badge have done in recent years have put a stain on our profession. And we're not tone deaf to that, and we're not discounting that. And we encourage the judicial system to bring those who tarnish the badge before justice. But there's nobody in this world that hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And so my guys and girls that work with us, my colleagues, we understand that we have a lot to do to earn the trust back with the community, but we think that that community trust starts with having courageous conversations like the one we had today. So I think it's important that we continue to have these conversations, and I'll be able, and I will make myself available to come on your show anytime that you will have me, so that we can build this bridge back between police and community.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Boatwright. And for everyone else, man, peace and love. Thank you guys, man. This was a great civil conversations. Love y'all.